Greed is usually described as a flaw, a weakness, a moral failure that appears when humans are given too much power or too much wealth. But what if that explanation is dangerously incomplete? What if greed is not something that grows inside us over time, but something that was placed there from the very beginning, something embedded so deeply into human behavior that it activates automatically when the right conditions are met? Because decades ago, hidden behind sealed laboratories, classified funding, and quietly buried research papers, a series of experiments were conducted that asked a forbidden question, not whether humans can become greedy, but whether greed activates even when morality, logic, and cooperation demand restraint. And what these experiments revealed was so unsettling that most of the data was never meant to be seen outside academic circles. Because the results suggested that when humans are placed in the presence of unlimited reward, the brain does not ask whether it should take more, it asks only how fast, how much, and whether someone else might take it first. The experiment began innocently. Framed as a study on decision-making and reward response, volunteers were placed into controlled environments where resources were abundant, far more than any individual could reasonably need. There were no punishments for sharing and no rewards for hoarding. Participants were explicitly told that cooperation would benefit everyone equally, yet something strange happened almost immediately. Without being instructed to compete, participants began to compete anyway. Hands reached faster, bodies leaned closer, voices grew sharper, and subtle aggression emerged where none had been encouraged. Brain scans taken during these moments showed heightened activity in regions associated with survival threat, not pleasure, as if the presence of abundance itself triggered a primitive alarm, a signal that said take now before it disappears, even though logically there was no disappearance coming. What disturbed researchers was not that some participants behaved selfishly, but that nearly all of them did, regardless of background, education, culture, or personal values. Even individuals who strongly identified as altruistic began to rationalize their behavior in real time, justifying excess as efficiency, preparation, or responsibility. The mind constructed reasons after the impulse had already acted, suggesting that greed was not the result of thought, but the cause of it. And when researchers altered the experiment by introducing visible observers or moral reminders, the behavior changed only slightly. Participants became more strategic, not more generous. They hid their greed better, rather than eliminating it. This raised an even darker possibility, that morality does not remove greed, it only teaches it how to wear a mask. As the experiment continued, another layer was revealed. When participants believed others were watching, they took less. But when they believed others might take first, they took more. Fear of loss amplified greed faster than desire for gain, a pattern consistent with ancient survival mechanisms, suggesting that greed may not be a social defect at all, but a biological response designed for scarcity, now misfiring in a world of abundance. But the most chilling discovery came when researchers tested children, before social conditioning, before economic understanding, before moral education. The same patterns emerged. Given access to shared rewards, children instinctively grabbed more than they needed, not out of malice, but urgency. Their faces showed not joy, but focus, the same focus seen in adults, the same neurological activation, implying that greed does not have to be taught, it only needs to be triggered. At this point, the experiment shifted from observation to manipulation. Researchers began altering the environment subtly, dimming the lights around the shared resources, adding ticking sounds, creating a sense of time pressure without explicit deadlines, and every small signal that suggested urgency caused greed to spike dramatically. Even though nothing material had changed, abundance remained constant, but perception altered behavior completely, which led to a terrifying conclusion. Humans are not driven by how much there is, but by how much they believe they might lose, and that belief can be engineered, controlled, and exploited. The experiment ended not because it was completed, but because the implications became too uncomfortable. If greed could be activated so easily, then it could also be predicted, guided, and weaponized. And if that was true, then many of the systems humans believe are based on choice, free will, and rational decision-making might actually be operating on far older, far darker code, buried deep within the human brain, waiting patiently for the right signal to wake it up. As the data was reviewed and patterns became impossible to ignore, researchers realized that they were no longer studying behavior, they were uncovering architecture, a hidden framework inside the human mind that responds to opportunity the same way it responds to danger. And this reframed everything. because greed was no longer a moral failure, it was a survival reflex. One that had evolved to keep early humans alive in environments where resources vanished quickly and competition was lethal. But evolution never anticipated a world where scarcity could be simulated without being real, where abundance could be dangled like bait, and where perception mattered more than reality. Subsequent experiments built on this realization by introducing artificial scarcity, not by removing resources, but by suggesting that others might act unpredictably, and every time uncertainty increased, greed followed instantly. Participants did not wait for proof, suspicion alone was enough, and this exposed another hidden mechanism. Humans do not become greedy when resources are scarce, they become greedy when trust collapses. Once trust was weakened, cooperation died almost immediately, even when cooperation was clearly the superior strategy. This revealed why entire societies can shift from collaboration to competition almost overnight, not because resources disappear, but because confidence in fairness does. And then came the most controversial phase of the research, simulations that mirrored real-world systems, markets, social hierarchies, and reward structures. Participants were placed into environments resembling financial systems where value was abstract rather than physical, numbers on screens instead of objects in hand, yet the same patterns emerged. People chased accumulation even when it had no tangible benefit, hoarding points that could not be spent, could not improve their outcome, could not change their status, but still felt impossible to give up, brain scans showed. Dopamine spikes not from reward itself, but from the act of acquisition, meaning the brain did not care what was gained, only that something was taken, and this explained why greed often feels empty even when successful, because the satisfaction comes from the act, not the result. Researchers then tested what happens when limits are introduced, caps on accumulation, forced redistribution, transparency. And the results were deeply ironic. Limits reduced anxiety but increased resentment. People felt calmer yet angrier, as if something essential was being denied, even though their well-being improved, which suggested that greed is not just about wanting more, but about resisting restraint. The mind interprets limits as threat, even when limits are beneficial, and this insight sent shockwaves through behavioral science, because it meant that systems designed to protect people from excess might be neurologically interpreted as oppression, triggering backlash, rebellion, and covert hoarding behaviors. The experiment also revealed a hierarchy within greed itself. Those who gained early became defensive, those who lost early became reckless, and those who remained neutral eventually chose sides. Neutrality was unstable, forcing alignment toward accumulation or resistance. There was no sustainable middle ground, and when participants were informed of these patterns, when they were shown their own data, many refused to believe it, insisting they would behave differently next time. Yet when tested again, they did not. Self-awareness did not override instinct, it merely created better stories to justify the same behavior. This shattered the comforting belief that education alone can eliminate greed, because the behavior was not rooted in ignorance, it was rooted in instinct. And perhaps the most disturbing revelation was this: greed did not correlate strongly with wealth, intelligence, or social status. It correlated with perceived vulnerability. Those who felt even slightly insecure displayed significantly higher accumulation behavior, meaning that greed thrives not in abundance, but in fear, and fear does not need to be real, it only needs to be believable. This reframed how power functions in modern systems, because controlling perception could control behavior, not through force, but through suggestion, implication, and uncertainty. The experiment's findings quietly circulated among policymakers, economists, and behavioral strategists, not as warnings, but as tools, and that is where the line between discovery and exploitation began to blur. By the time the final phase of the experiment concluded, the question was no longer whether greed is programmed into humans, but whether modern society is designed to constantly activate it, because once the mechanisms were understood, they became impossible to unsee. The endless notifications, the artificial deadlines, the limited offers, the competitive metrics, all functioned as triggers, recreating the same conditions that caused participants to abandon cooperation in the lab. Only now on a global scale, researchers noted that when people believe opportunity is fleeting, they stop asking whether they need something and start asking whether someone else might take it, and this shift happens in milliseconds, below conscious awareness, which explains why regret often follows immediately after impulsive accumulation. The decision was never fully conscious to begin with. The experiment also Explored whether greed could be permanently reduced, not suppressed, but genuinely quieted, and the answer was unsettling. Temporary reductions were possible through stability, trust, and predictability, but the baseline always returned, like a system resetting to default. Unless the environment itself changed consistently over time, short-term interventions failed, because the brain is patient, it waits. And this has profound implications, because it suggests that individuals are not broken. Environments are. When systems constantly signal threat, urgency, and competition, greed becomes rational, inevitable, and even necessary for psychological survival. The experiment concluded with a final test. Participants were placed into a system where rewards increased when others succeeded, a true cooperative structure, and for the first time, greed declined significantly. But only after extended exposure. Trust had to be rebuilt slowly, resistance was high at first, suspicion lingered, but once stability held, accumulation behavior decreased naturally, not through force, but through safety, and this led to the final conclusion: greed is not evil, it is a signal, a response to perceived instability. But here lies the danger: signals can be manipulated, and when they are, behavior follows predictably. The researchers sealed their final report with a warning, not about human nature, but about those who understand it too well, because anyone who can control perceived scarcity, trust, and urgency can guide entire populations toward competition, hoarding, and conflict without ever issuing a command. And once that switch is flipped, reversing it is extraordinarily difficult. The experiment ended, but its implications did not, because the real world had already begun running the same test, not in laboratories, but everywhere, and the most unsettling question remains unanswered. If greed can be programmed, triggered, and controlled, then how much of what we call choice is truly ours, and how much is simply a response to signals we never consciously agreed to follow?